So in terms of the different doctoral, questions and stuff, so I have several of them that you might be thinking about. So the first one, how long are doctoral classes? So each class are likely going to be in between 3 to 5 hours long. It's a seminar class, so you're going to be sitting there. Usually what we do is we take a break halfway through, or maybe even two breaks, depending on how exhausted everybody is. Usually people are really exhausted during these different classes, and it's pretty intense. You have to do a lot of reading beforehand, and then you jump into it and sort of discuss these different research ideas and stuff. So how many sessions are typically for a PhD class? It's similar for an undergrad that meets only one day a week, and you would meet, maybe it's 10 to 15 different sessions. And depending on the different universities, it's going to be shorter or longer, depending on whether it's a quarter system or the semester system. It's really different depending on the different universities, but really it's somewhere between 10 to 15 classes that you're gonna have, and you're gonna meet and get to know the different professors and different students that are in your cohort a little bit better and have these discussions. So typically, how many people are in a PhD seminar? So often it's anywhere going to be between one, and that's pretty common actually. PhD seminars of 1 to 20 people, which is getting less common, where there's a large group of people. I've been in classes where there have been 20, maybe it's 25 people that was in economics, and that's a little bit more common there, I think, and that's where you're actually doing the classes with master's level students, and you're just kind of getting grouped together there. But in a PhD seminar, basically the norm is anywhere between 3 to 8 people, where 4 to 5 people is probably about the average in terms of different universities around the country, around the world, where you're going to be grouped together. If you start getting larger than that, it gets really difficult for the professors to manage all of that, because there's usually in each particular subfield, right? So in strategy is going to be your discipline. And there's usually in each school, unless you're at a really large school like Harvard or Stanford or something like that, and even then that's pretty small. There's just not a lot of people to sort of manage the process, manage the students. So they usually keep it pretty small. It's pretty intense, in other words, when there's very few people in those different programs, and the intensity increases, right? So the demands on you as an individual increases. Now, there's PhD programs that are going to be more sort of lab-based. In those ones that are more lab-based, maybe it's in psychology, for example. Maybe it is in engineering or science. It's going to be a little bit different, and they have a different sort of way of doing research. I was in engineering in my undergrad, and looking at it, and it's kind of similar in a lot of different ways with the seminars, but then you have a lab structure where you're doing research within a lab structure, where it's going to be a little bit larger and stuff like that. So some of them tend to be a little bit larger. How many? Okay. What do you do in a PhD seminar or a doctoral seminar? Well, that's a good question, because usually what you end up doing is analyzing papers and research that are relevant to the particular class that you're taking. So my class is on strategy, innovation, and research methods. So we might talk about each individual session. We might talk about a specific subfield within that. Maybe we talk about something to do with innovation that is interesting. If you're in an engineering class and you're talking about data management, for example, you might talk about different aspects of data management, how to do that and stuff like that. There's research, people do research on all this kind of stuff around the world to sort of get the cutting edge. And then so you look at a paper of somebody that's done the research, and then you critique that paper generally. And that's a PhD seminar. That's kind of normal in terms of how you might do it, is that you'd critique it. You might, depending on what field that you're in, you might do some equations. Sometimes you'd have much more of a discussion and analyze the different ideas and look at their sort of weaknesses and strengths, and sort of what are the research gaps that are left. Look at those different research gaps and have a discussion about them. What do you think about them? Just think about all sorts of different angles of it, and try to critique the papers, and as well as think about where can we take this further. And that's the important part, is thinking about where can we take it further, because that's where you get a lot of ideas for people to go out and do really interesting things. And that's really what the name of the game is, and that's what you're trying to do, right? And so you're critiquing what other people have done around the world and try to make sense of what other people have done around the world and put it all together and have a coherent, somewhat coherent discussion about research and stuff. It's not always easy to do that because it's really exhausting. So normally what you get is maybe it's 4 to 5 papers. Personally, I try to keep it around 4 to 5 papers. Sometimes, depending on who you're working with or what class you're taking, it could be 10 papers. Now that's a lot of reading for a week. If it's 10 papers, that's 30 pages per paper. That's a lot of reading, right? You're looking at 300 pages, and that's pretty dense. Most of the time it's pretty dense, depending on it all depends on a lot of different factors. If it's more applied, it's usually less dense. It's easier to read. If it's more theoretical, really dense, a lot more difficult to read, and it depends on the different sort of journals that you're reading in terms of how it is and what the research methods are. If they're more cutting edge, if they're less cutting edge, there's lots of sort of different factors. You might read a couple of books as well when you're doing that, and because sometimes books are really useful to understand what's going on. You just kind of get a synopsis of the field or a summary of the field. It's not meant to, PhD seminar courses, not meant to be all-inclusive in any sort of way, because research is really big and broad, and there's lots of things that you can cover. So it's really hard for me as the instructor or the professor to go through the class and pick out different papers that I like, or things that just are interesting. Sometimes I pull out, ones that are seminal papers, and those are ones that sort of define the field, and then I'm trying to look at ones that are more cutting edge that just came out. And so sometimes they could be mixed in terms of the quality, the ones that just come out. So there's lots of different variability in what we're trying to do and trying to accomplish, and it's just kind of getting you a feel for each different area. And it's not to say that I'm an expert. It's not to say that any particular person is an expert in that particular domain. It's just you just cover some interesting things to get a sense of what it's about. Is a PhD seminar easy? Is it easier than undergrad courses? Generally, no. I would say that they're quite a bit harder in terms of the demands that are put on you. So I would imagine, I think a good equivalent sort of calculation, sort of way to think about it, a PhD seminar course, you're probably looking at its equivalent to about 2 undergrad courses at once. So it's going to seem like I'm not taking that many courses. You might take 3 or 4 a semester, no more than that. And a semester, and you might think, that's not that many, but it is a lot. You're going to be overwhelmed, and everybody that does it, you will find that you're overwhelmed in terms of the number of readings that you have to do. You often have to write an essay or a manuscript, a research manuscript that's 20 to 30 pages long. Just a lot of work that's involved. And so that's going to seem like it's pretty intense when you're doing that. When you're in the thick of things, it is going to seem pretty intense, as well as everything else that's going on around you. So generally, PhD seminars are a little bit more tougher, but it really depends on a lot of different factors. From my experience, it really depends on the discipline. It really depends on the instructor. It's probably the most important thing, because everybody has their own flair and style in terms of instructing to sort of get a sense of what you're doing. Some people are more like, well, just jump into the field and do your own research. And so you don't cover a lot of reading. Other people want to cover a lot to give you, hit the ground running and have a nice conversation going forward. And it really just depends on what you're trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish as an instructor and what your style is.